Is the sixth session that we have on DataFest, the second live. Everything else has been online. And so we're just very happy to have you. I'm going to introduce myself, a little bit of the team that we're organizing here, and then I'll introduce the panel for you. My name is Liz Guzman Ramirez. I am the Research Data Steward for RSM and ESE. I support all of the researchers. And the team that actually all of it is here is very nice to see. We have Mutaleni, which is the project manager of the library, handling the presentation. We have Rob and Paul, both of them are faculty liaisons. Rob is for RSM and Paul for ESE. And we have Ninke, which is the project manager for, or project lead of the EDR, the Erasmus Data Repository, which is based on Fixture, that you will learn later on as well. And so I'm going to introduce to you the panel. Today we're going to talk about concerns on open data. And yes, thank you. And we're going to bust some myths. So these concerns actually come from the survey that was conducted to RSM and ESE researchers last April. So for the whole month of April, we put this survey out. There was about being optimistic 30% response from all the researchers. So that's something you need to know. So we take these concerns with a grain of salt, but it's important that we tackle them, I think, and we discuss them, and hopefully we will encourage a discussion between you guys. So, tackling these concerns in our panel, we have Robin van Vleuten, is an ESE privacy officer. We have Aurelie Lemmens, and she's an associate professor of marketing at RSM and an academic director of the expert practice on customer analytics on ECTA. We have Thomas Peeters. He's an associate professor at the Department of Applied Economics of ESE, and he runs the Erasmus Center for Applied Sports Economics. We also have Marianne Groep-Foncke. She's a research officer of the Institutions for Collective Action, which studies the phenomenon of organizations in which the pursuit of societal impact is part of a business strategy. And we have Armel Lefebvre, which is the information manager for both RSM and ESE, so ERIM information manager. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session. We're gonna go through one of the concerns, so we will present to you the top concerns that we have. I will show you, so if we go to the first one, perfect. So the first one is about privacy. So the first concern was there could be issues related to privacy for me to open the data, right? So this was a question based on how much or what concerns will apply to you when you wanna open your data. And so if we go to the next slide, so 55% of the responses said there could be concerns on privacy. I'm concerned about that. And that you see the distribution of ESE and RSM and PhD, postdoc, tenure track, and tenure faculty member responses. Also, the survey is online, by the way, it's public. You can find all the responses online. So, Robin, tell us about privacy issues and why would you or we need to be concerned about privacy when publishing our data?
Thank you for having me, first of all. I was quite surprised that this was one of the concerns, and because of that I was invited to be here to a Mythbuster session, because one of the first things that I'd like to do is not bust this as a myth. There might be concerns with your research concerning privacy. There are a couple of other myths regarding that I'd like to bust, but I'll do that later on. So first of all, if you can just go to the next slides, I think the first thing that I'd like to tell people is yes, please be concerned, but secondly, don't be too concerned, because there's a lot of these issues that we can tackle quite easily, and if we're not able to tackle them quite easily, then I will help you, and I've got other colleagues to help you to do that as well. Maybe let's get to a couple of myths that are kind of floating around there. First of all, if I don't make the data public, I don't need to think about privacy. Some people seem to think that if you don't publish data, if you don't make it publicly accessible, then you don't need to think about privacy. This is a myth. This is something that I'd like to stress. As long as you're using personal data for your research, privacy is and will be involved, and you need to concern yourself with this. Again, something that we can take care of, but simply not publishing data doesn't mean that you don't have responsibilities in regards to the privacy of your research participants or the people whose data you're using for your research. Then the second myth that I've been hearing sometimes is sharing data means everybody can see and use it. Again, from a privacy perspective, this would seem like a kind of a horror scenario. Don't worry, you can share data, but you can have a say in who gets the data and how broadly you're going to share it. Not simply with whom you're going to share the data, but also how much of your data you're going to share. And it doesn't mean that your entire data set is up for grabs for just simply everybody to see, to look into, to maybe raise other concerns. And then the third myth is, I think, the toughest one around. I don't collect names, so my data is anonymous. Strictly speaking, if you look at the term anonymous, it means without a name, right? But if I say the current ESC privacy officer, I'm not using a name, but I'm sure I'm talking about one single person, and a guy sitting right here. That means that you're still able to identify people without having a name. You can still use pseudonyms. Qualtrics automatically collects IP addresses. Even if you pseudo-anonymize your data set, then you can still, with some effort, see a single person behind that data set with a little bit extra effort. So as long as you do that, as long as within the data set you're able to distinguish one specific person, the data set you're using is not anonymous. So I think we have to steer away from the term anonymous in research quite often, because usually things aren't anonymous. They're pseudo-anonymized maybe, but anonymous is quite a heavy term to use here. In summary, I've got this slide to kind of wrap everything up. Also, you might want to prefer answers and simply busting those myths. So those we can see on the next slide. First of all, if you are ever in doubt, if you need help, please reach out to me, for the people from ESC, or to my colleague at RSM, Arvin Kuzai. Also, make sure that you're using approved systems, so Erasmus University approved systems. Then we've got agreements in place with third parties that they're not going to use the data for their own purposes, and that's something that we need to take care of. If you move to secure systems, then we can guarantee that we have those agreements in place. And thirdly, make sure you collect the data legally with an eye for your respondents' privacy, for instance. Inform them correctly, get their consent, and otherwise get correct agreements in place if, for instance, you're buying data sets. I think those are the main myths and best short-term solutions to any problems. Even if I'm not able to solve them quickly, I will try to solve them in the long term for you. So yeah, that's it, I think.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone that want to have a question about this myth or something that want to follow up? If not, oh yeah, please.
So I guess with privacy, there's also this whole GDPR issue.
Right.
I've always thought that the problem is I don't really understand GDPR. Back when I was a PhD student, I was collecting completely public data from people's LinkedIn profiles and creating a data set. I still had to fill in some form for GDPR. I mean, this is not about open data per se, but this is more about having the data yourself and the privacy issues. I mean, is there a simple guideline to when do you have to sort of declare your data set? When do you have to inform people that they are in your data set?
First of all, I think GDPR is simply what got me my job. It doesn't mean that there wasn't privacy before that, but it got higher on the priority list. So since the 25th
Robin,
of... Sorry,
could you repeat the question for the stream so they cannot hear it? Just briefly, what was the question?
Sure. I kind of lost my train of thought now.
Sorry.
The thing is, as I said earlier, if you're using data, personal data for your research, even if you're web scraping it, as you kind of described in your example, there are privacy elements to your research. So you simply need to tackle those because you're doing the research with personal data. If we're talking about open data and making your research more available and your research data more available, then I mean you need to think about privacy in the first place already. So why not think about it a little bit longer and also get a data set that you can publish and let other researchers use. So again, if there's anything specifically unclear about GDPR, that's what privacy officers are for, and that's what I'm very keen on helping you with.
Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to the second concern. So this is the concern that says, I might lose control over how my materials and or code are being used. For this concern, we have Thomas Peeters. Yes. Yeah. If we go to the next slide, we will see how many people are concerned with this. So this is 38% of the respondents, and that you see the distribution on ESE, RSM, and position-wise.
Yeah, so if you can go to the next slide. So I think the first question to ask yourself, if you have this concern, is who is it out there in the world that you think is going to misuse your data? And by misusing, I think you mean that somebody's going to, come and do bad things with it. So not to be too frank, but I think most people that will download your data are other researchers. Now, I think, given that your data is GDPR approved and everything, what other researchers will do when they download your data is they will make more citations for you. So why would you be so concerned that another also tax-paid individual is taking your data and using it to create more knowledge and cite you in the process, right? So that, I think, is a win for you. So who else might use your data? People like thesis students. So what I think is nice about sharing your data, making a code book, making everything available, is that actually now you can give them a link, and you don't need to worry about making Dropboxes for them and all that stuff, sending them emails of 100 megabyte attachments, because it's all there on the data repository, and they get the illustrations, they get the codes, they get everything that they need explained to them quite well. So if it's them that are going to steal your data, again, think of this as a gain, because these people probably are happy to use it, and that will save you some time. Then there's private companies, citizens. Now, one thing I think we should remember is these people pay our wages. So if a private citizen wants to build on your research, why is that so bad, right? And the question I would say is, what do you think that they're going to do with it that is so bad? I mean, supposedly this research is related to a paper which accurately reflects what's to be found in the data, right? So that knowledge is in the public domain. Do you think that the people at a company are interested in going even deeper than you have already done in your management science or marketing science paper? Probably not. They will be probably quite happy to see, if at all they read your paper, which would already be quite something. I think it's probably going to stay with that. Let's not kid ourselves too much. Then there's the replication police. Now these guys, they can be pretty scary. But again, I think when you document your code and you give it in a nice way, you present it in a nice way, it's actually less likely that these people will fail to replicate you. Because mostly when this thing goes wrong, it's because they simply can't replicate you because they can't figure out what you did, right? So if you want to sort of preempt this, I mean, the better way is to go on the first strike, right? And make sure that there is something to that you guide people that want to replicate through what you did, because that will actually make it more clear what you've done, and also makes your choices in doing the research more defensible, because you show what you've done, and they can then agree or not agree with the choice, but at least it's clear why and what you chose. And then there's foreign government agencies and the like, James Bond kind of figures. And then I want to know what kind of research you're really doing, because then I want a piece of that too. But I don't think, to be honest, most of our research is not in that domain. I mean, if you were a rocket scientist or a weapon engineer or something, I would think, okay, but for our social science work, I think mostly that's not really where we are. So why? And then the second thing is, so given that these are the stakeholders, on a good day, we get some downloads from these people. So why would you have more control when you actually post the data and the code in a repository rather than not? So the first thing, of course, is that you get timestamps and versions, and now there should be, then it's clear you were here first, right? This is your thing. So if somebody comes and steals it and then, devises a nuclear bomb with your economic research, at least you can say, I was there first. Then there's this licensing thing, and I'm really not an expert on this, but it's good that there's a license on your data because that means it's yours. Whereas if it's in a Dropbox or on a Google site or on, all sorts of privately held devices, you might say, or given on a USB stick to a thesis student, what happens to it then? Nobody knows. And then, of course, you can track your views, downloads, and citations. And this is quite handy if you're ever writing a research proposal, getting a grant, maybe in your tenure file you can mention this. And then I put illustrations. Yes, so here's the data repository. And you can see there the versioning. So actually, this is a data set of mine, and I changed the title of it, so I get a new version. Yay. So that's what's happened there. Here's the name of my license. I'm not sure that means a lot to you, but I'm told this is important because now you have a license. And then here's the usage metrics. And actually, this is for one of my papers. So there were 331 downloads. It's been on there for, since you can see it there, since the 5th of January. So I don't think that's too bad. And actually, you can, you can brag with that. If you have for NWO, you have to write this thing where you have to say, society benefits from my research. Now you don't actually have to make it all up. You can actually say this, people use my stuff. That's nice. So that's why I think it's a good idea to not worry too much about the misuse of your data, but rather think of it the other way. How little is your research actually being used now? Wouldn't it be great if it were used a little bit more? Probably. For most of us, the answer is yes.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Is there anyone that has a comment, question, contra, suggestion? No? Yes? Yes.
Yeah.
But the when, so when would you post your data? In your case, do you post them when the paper is accepted or when you start working on a paper? What's the ideal moment to post them?
Well, the ideal moment to think about posting is when you start, I would say, and already made the codebook, because now I'm making a codebook for a paper I started in 2014. It's horror. But you can post an embargo and then release when your paper is finally published. So that's probably the gold standard. What's hard to do is then to have already your do files and stuff in there, which I always also post. So there's one thing to post the original data that you can probably do at the start. The data repository allows for these versions, but the problem is when you do put them out, they're findable. So if you really need to be double blind, then people can probably track you as being the author of this because of your postings here. So that's a little bit of a disadvantage of posting it early on if you really want to have yourself anonymized in the process. So there's other, I shouldn't say this here, but there's other places where you can post the data that are anonymous. So if you really need that, then probably I would say at publication. But it's possible, and usually in econ it's not such a big deal anymore. But I guess in marketing, it's we have a lot of single blind now. So
No, we don't.
yeah, I know.
Thank you so much for that question and answer. We can move to the third concern, which is Aurelie. The third concern is I might not receive appropriate credit for developing the materials and/or code if I make them openly available. So this was the concern for 35% of the people. and that you see the distribution, which is pretty equal, RSM and ESE. And most of the people concerned about this are tenure-track faculty members, as you can see. Aurelie, what do you think about this concern?
Yeah, I was. So thank you for asking the question. Actually, it was very funny because it made me thought about a discussion I had a long time ago with my PhD advisor when I was a PhD student, because he's from statistics and I was writing a thesis in marketing. So it was interesting to have the confrontation of styles. And he was telling me all the time that in statistics, it's actually very common practice. As soon as you have your code, you put it, at the time it was on your own website, because I guess there was no GitHub, but he would do that. And he would tell me all the time, you need to do the same, you need to do the same. But when I would talk to people from marketing, they would tell me, if you're going to do that, you're going to lose a competitive advantage and you're not going to have the credit for the code. And it was funny to hear these two different speeches from the beginning. And actually now I'm very happy to see that also in business and in marketing, we actually move in the same direction. So maybe those feel actually ahead of us. And maybe the reason is that, these were, pure science field where we are more applied science. And maybe the fact that it's more applied make it less straightforward that we want to publish the code. But I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be the case. So I think the first reason why you should make your code and material available, and I'm sorry, I'm going to talk mostly about code because this is my own background. I'm writing codes, but that's also applied to data. Is simply because you have to comply with the journals, right? So most of the journals where we try to publish, you actually have to give your code or the data. And even if you have like data with an NDA, you cannot always hide behind that and not publish your data. So you can synthesize your data and then also publish that on the website. So that's, I think, the first reason why you should do that. I think the second reason, it actually helps you a lot, especially when you have to take up a revision after a few years that the papers come back and then you have to look back into your code. If you haven't documented your code properly, and if you put it online, you are forced to document it, then it really helps you with the revision, if you have done that. And I think as a side, maybe advantage is actually you make it available to your co-authors by doing so. And that's also good as I think even as a protection mechanism, if something happened in the future that someone would say, okay, you did something wrong with the code or with the data, you can always say, look, the code is there, available to everyone, so it's not hiding anything. So I think it's actually good to do that. I think the third reason is to simply help science, right? We should not forget that the goal is not to become famous or anything like that, but it's actually to help science, at least that's what I'm thinking. So if you want to help science, the more if you put your code available or your data, you're actually going to help science progress faster, I'm guessing, because you can then directly build on other people's work faster. And that's very valuable, I think, for science. So if you take that perspective, it's kind of obvious that you want to make everything open. And finally, I think impact also, actually, in terms of credibility, actually impact might actually be higher if you put things online. Like I had a few times, I recently tried to put together our package for a paper. It was a very fun experience, but what I also noticed, which was very rewarding, is that then companies start contacting you. Actually, they say, oh, I've seen your code, I actually want to use it. Can we talk? Can we speak? And it's actually very nice as a researcher to have impact in this way, so that's very nice. Or sometimes companies actually want to implement the code in their own software, which I think is also a good option for us as researchers to increase impact. So I think I only see ways to actually increase your credibility and get more benefits from doing that. So my recommendation would be to make your code available, and if you can, to write a package that is well documented. I think that's the nicest thing you can do. Generate data, even if you have data with NDA. Someone in the audience told me at some point, or you can actually generate the synthetic data even with data with NDA, and this way you can still make them available. So that's super nice. And finally, I think it's our role to show our own PhD students and even our master students that it's the way to go, right? So when I start now with new PhD students, I tell them, look, we're going to have a Git repository, or we're going to have OSF, and then we're going to put everything out there. And this way you can collaborate in a more transparent way. And hopefully in 5 years, they will be the one who, make science, and then they will make things better than we did. So that's the very nice package in R that can generate this synthetic data. I think this is a very easy, straightforward way to do it. So you can see it's just one line of code, basically. So it's not a lot of work, even if you don't know anything about R. I think you can still do it. And this is another, if you can go back, this is another thing I wanted to mention. Actually, another way, I think, for open science is it's an option I'm considering myself. So whether you could maybe publish your own packages in a journal like the Journal of Statistical Software. So it's an ERIM P-star journal, equivalent P-star journal. So I mean, why not considering doing that as well as a way to, to be more open and then have more impact? So I think that's a nice option too. Yeah, and that's what you get basically. I tried on my data, and you can see like the software directly gives you the original data distribution and then the new data distribution. You can see it maps both very well. So it's very straightforward and very easy to use. So I think we have no excuse for not doing that anymore, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. And also cheers to Antonio for supporting all of Very nice, very nice. Thank you, Aurelie. Is there a question, a comment, or a... Yes, please.
Yeah, I was just curious because you're sharing your codes quite a bit, and you were also discussing about that. And throughout the review process, we need to share. Sometimes we are asked to share codes, but they need to be anonymized, at least in my field, right? And I was wondering if you have any kind of best practices, suggestions on how to do that.
That's a good point. So the question was whether that would endanger the anonymity of the review process to publish your code, and that's a good point. I never actually gave my code when the paper was still under review. I only did that at the end, so I didn't have the problem. But I'm guessing, no, I'm going to do it as well.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do it. Like
So,
I would love
yeah.
to be able to do through the review process, but I could never share it because
Yeah.
my GitHub has my name on it.
My naive view on that is that reviewers know anyway who you are, I think. They can still Google the title of the paper, or they've seen you at presentation, so I don't think this is really anonymous, so that's why I personally don't see it as an issue, but it's true that in theory that's not something you should do. So I don't have a solution for that.
Okay, we can continue to the next concern. This is concern number 4. There could be issues related to intellectual property, and this is when we're going to touch about licenses. And for this, Armel is going to tell us everything about licenses. This was a concern for 33% of the respondents, and that's the distribution as well. Also, most tenure faculty members were the ones that responded, have this concern. So, Armel.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I wish that I could tell everything about licenses. It's quite something as a topic. But I think like I could start to mention why is it important to use these licenses is that well, there might be a myth that I share my data and that means that anybody can do anything with it, or I shared my software and I could have issues then with, for instance, working with commercial companies as an example that was used earlier. Well, actually, that depends on a lot of parameters, and this is why it's handy to know something about the licenses and knowing how to use them. There are many. There are different ones for data, for databases, for software. Here I zoom also a little bit more in the software, which has a vast array of different licenses. And well, the first type of licenses that we might think of if we are a bit afraid of our intellectual property is to say, well, it's mine, and so be it. And this is like with the copyright and the maybe also closed source. You don't even share it, but that is not really DataFest proof, so we will not really spend a lot of time on that one. So what you have, the two that are remaining is also to zoom in a little bit in the type of licenses, because you might think, okay, I'm maybe using a license and I'm sharing my code, but that means that I can't really handle any more to work with companies, or maybe to make some money with my software. This is also depending on the type of license and the stuff you actually want to do. And the two big categories that you find in the software licenses are like the permissive licenses, and this tells still the people, hey, I made it, and I want people that use the software that they know what they can do with it or what they can't do with it. But the thing is that they should say it started with like my idea. So there is still this attribution. So you are not losing, like your name will not get lost, or your work will not get lost, because you can be traced back to the initial projects and the initial code. And so it says license, you can use my stuff. These kind of licenses, because they are specific to software, can also add a few details like, well, if my software is broken, I'm not gonna fix it, I'm very sorry, because I have something else to do. My paper is published, for instance. It also say, well, if your computer starts completely crashing with my replication package, it's also not really my fault. This was written in the license, so you can use it as it is. So this area can also protections, of course, for you, because this is also that everything that you could see in this kind of licenses. And the last category was like really this copyleft license. This is a bit maybe a trickier one to adopt, because it has some like philosophy behind it, what says like, I share my code, I put it openly available, and you should too. But this is not about the permissive license. This is an extra constraint of very specific copyleft licenses. So there you enter really in the open source, the free software movement. There are a lot of very important pieces of software that are using these kind of licenses, but then it could be something extra to think about if you are using those ones, because then you will force, for instance, people that use your software to use the same license and to also put it available. And then you might think maybe some people want to use the software but not make their thing available. So actually this echoes like, okay, yes, there is this licenses, there is this extra protections, but what if there is no license? I mean, I put my code available and it's there maybe on GitHub and everybody can see it. Well, you will have actually quite some troubles, and you will not have addressed intellectual property at all, because, well, first people might be really afraid. They will say, oh, nice, there is that nice piece of code there available for me, but I don't know what to do with it. And if I take some part of it and then it makes the software crashes on someone's computer, maybe I will get sued or something. So because this is really not made clear, and this is also the role of the licenses. So your software might actually not even be used, even if you make all the efforts to put it available, just because you could have these kind of troubles in the background. So, well, if it's not reused, you might, as was already discussed here earlier, you might not have improvements, you would not have verification, or even no citations, which could be nice now. Nowadays, there are mechanisms to cite software too, and we mentioned that too. So this is all the things you might miss if this licensing stuff is not taught from the beginning. So it works a bit both ways, of course. When you find software, also check the licenses, because then you will know also what you can do or what it's not possible to do with that software. And maybe you will notice, maybe for my project I couldn't use that one. I've just added a link on the slides. You'll see it's a very big table with a lot of descriptions about different permissive and copyleft licenses that explains to you what they cover. Well, typically the advice here is to stick to one of the licenses that you might find in those big tables, not invent a new one, because then it makes a lot of troubles also in terms of community of users to actually understand what is really going on. So that was it for me, why licenses are important. We have an answer right now.
Excellent, thank you so much. Does anyone have a question or a comment? This link of choose a license is super useful. So if you have a question, Thomas, you can find which license to use. It's super useful. Yes, please.
I'm sure this choose a license. How do you in practice license something? You just write license underneath, or do you have to do something more?
Usually in practice, how that happens is you have a pre-made text file, let's say, that will tell you what, for instance, the MIT license, the Apache license. You have a pre-made text, and you add it to the files with your code. And it's usually a file which is conveniently called license. And that's why people will know, oh yeah, I must maybe first check that file. Maybe to add up on that, you have sometimes nice features. For instance, in GitHub, GitHub will actually read the content of this license file, and then it shows you in the code repository what you can do with the code, what you can't do. So it's also very helpful, because then you have kind of summary. You don't really need to bother to read everything. But concretely, it's a text file, and you say these are the conditions, and it's pre-made, nothing to do.
And also, if I may, so when you publish anything in the EDR, in the Erasmus Data Repository, you also have so it's like a tab that you choose the license that you wanna, and then it sort of, and that's what Thomas showed us, that it sort of makes this image of the type of license that you're publishing. That has to have a license. Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. Okay, so the last but not least concern of today, it was other researchers could use my data for another study that I intend to conduct in the future. Okay, so this was a concern of 31% of the respondents, and you see the distribution, same, very similar for ESC and RSM, mostly concern for tenure faculty members and PhD students, I would say. Okay, Marianne, what do you think about this concern?
Yeah, other researchers could use my data. Great. If I can have the next slide, please. Why do I think that's great? It's about a certain scientific values. Doing science is about, well, analyzing data, getting results, and then have others to check your results, check your methodology, validation. In short, dialogue is a vital part of science. Bit too quick. And another part is building further on each other results. We have to advance science. Otherwise, it's what is it about? And I'd like to start with a letter point first. Well, I'm a bit odd here in this group, for I'm a historian. Last January, I graduated as a PhD. And when I was writing my dissertation, I decided not alone to deposit my data set, but also distribute my thesis freely. So I skipped the part with publishers and the like. I just put it on Zenodo, on Humanities Commons, and on the data repository of the University of Amsterdam, where I did my promotion trajectory. And the data set is with DANS, where it is permanently, cured for, I should say. Yes, please. And, well, Thomas beats me at it, of course, but I was quite happy to see that within, well, slightly less than a year, there were quite some downloads of, the first three are the dissertation itself, and the last one, the data set. And why do I think that's important, that others can use this data set as well? Well, throughout the Netherlands, archives are busy with artificial intelligence to teach computers how to read ancient handwriting. Gemeentearchief Amsterdam is quite far with that process. And what the most of these archives are doing is hiring volunteers, or, well, using volunteers to check the transcribing that the computers did. That's nice that we all have all those volunteers who are doing these jobs for us. But we as scientists are transcribing these texts as well, or other texts as well. So why shouldn't we feed our transcriptions into these processes and help to kickstart these processes? So there's one way, but it's also the other way around. For when computers can read handwritten texts, we as scientists can search full texts in material. I had to turn page after page after page and have a headache of trying to read 17th century writing. So I think it's in our interest that we share our data. If we are a historian or marketing, economics, management, whatever. And then the other point, entering into the dialogue about the results. I took a screenshot from the EDR, the Erasmus Data Repository, where the research group that I'm the research officer of, Institutions for Collective Action here at RSM, has deposited a data set as well. And we did that when only, I think 3 or 4 of the articles were published. They were all accepted for publication, but they were not published yet. And still we dared to put it into the open. Why? Well, science, as I said, is about dialogue, and the odds are not that high that other groups are trying to do exactly the same research as we. And even if they would, well, then we have the dialogue we seek. So I'm not really scared of sharing data. In short, it's time to let others have a say.
So much. Great. Does anyone have a comment or a question about sharing data or concerns about sharing your own data? Yes.
Can I summarize your point by saying, listen, we benefited from other researchers, so let them benefit from your work as well, right?
There's an amount of reciprocity in it. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Thank you. Great. All right. Thank you so much. So this was the top 5 concerns. We do have questions from when people register. They send some questions in advance. So one of the first question was, what is the biggest misconception you yourself held in the past about open data or data sharing? So think back when you were not doing this. What was the first thing that you thought, oh, how do I do this? Why do I do this? Who do I ask? If we go, Peter?
For me,
Thomas.
I think the first thing that I worried about was really what can I share, in the sense that when I collect something from the internet or from, which is, when you work with football or other sports, you will find that the internet has more than you need. What can you actually, so suppose that I go online and I gather stuff, in what kind of trouble can I get for using it and then bring it together and publishing it again on the internet? So that would be, then I talk to the people at the library about, what can and cannot be done. And, a lot can be done, it turns out. So that was my primary concern.
Thank you. Marianne, I'm just going to go like this.
Well, it was quite naive, I think, but I thought that sharing my thesis with the world would probably or possibly gain me a larger audience and would be easier than trying to find a publisher. Well, of course, that's usually naive, because this publisher promotes the books he publishes. So I had to do an effort myself to bring both data and the text in spotlights to the front.
Aurelie?
For me, misconception was that I thought it was only about data and not about code. That's what my first understanding, maybe because of the name. And then the second one was even for the data that it would not concern me or people in the in the Mandeville building, because we are working with companies' data and things like that, and therefore we don't apply to this to this thing. But actually, that's not the case. Like I said earlier, we can, even with company data, you can still synthesize them and share them with other people. So it does apply to me.
I think for me the main what surprised me is that how beneficial sharing data can be, even if you don't share everything. It's one of the myths that I had to get busted on my side as well. Even if you don't share it as broadly with as broad as an audience, or don't share as much, it can still benefit others. And that's something that I realized. Yeah, that's one of the.
Yeah, I think for me, simply when I was still at the stage of studying and then starting to write papers, well, with kind of my software like developer background, I thought, well, that must be very easy to do because we have so many tools, we have so much stuff that is already used or in companies or in professional settings. So everything kind of exists, and then you feel that when you start with, trying to really publish it, or for instance, like a very interesting point that was made going through peer review, etc. How does then everything bit seems to fall apart when you are in the scientific domain? So I would say my misconception was like it should be really easy, and it isn't. So yeah.
All right, thank you. We have a second question that was also sent. It's pretty long, so I'll just bear with me. One of the biggest concerns is that open data creates a lifelong commitment of the researcher to answer questions about a research project. In the current situation, a project is finished after publication unless strange results pop up in other people's replication. The greatest opportunity in my mind for open data is that we can work on data sets that only need to be downloaded once. For instance, most Bloomberg data, which has monthly downloads limits, is downloaded by RSM students who need US stock market data, which can be obtained from different platforms. How can we organize ourselves to make efficient use of limited data access? Yeah, please.
There's two things in there. So the first part is about that your paper is finished at publication and you'll never be bothered again. If you're in marketing, I think you should contact Aurelie about that. This is simply not true. You are still responsible for what you did, even if it's published, and it can come back to bite you, open or not. And then the second part is how can we organize ourselves to make efficient use of the limited data access. I think when students do thesis work, a lot of, like I said, it's not that important that it's the latest stock market price from Bloomberg that they have, right? If your archive from your paper that a student is going to replicate has data from 1995 to 2015, that's plenty of data to work with. And that's enough to practice for a student and to show to the world that he can do regression and a fancy model and an R package and whatnot. There's no need for them to, have the data from yesterday, because most of their thesis work doesn't really require, don't want to disregard the importance of that, but most of the data is already downloaded once. So if we make it open, then they can make use of that and they don't need to go on the Bloomberg.
Thank you. Does anyone have another answer or a comment? Okay, we do have two more questions from the live stream. So it says, question for the researchers. Now that the myths are busted, what do you like most to happen, or what already happened as a result of publishing your data and code? That is question one. Question two, what can EUR support staff, like us, can do for you? What can we help you with?
Maybe I can say something about the second question. Actually, at the RSM we have the people who help us with. Recently I was in touch with them. Once you have your code ready, they can help you make the code a package, and if you document it sufficiently, they can actually help you. Make it open and then used by other people. So actually, there are already a lot of things that are in place, and maybe we don't use them enough to facilitate open science.
Yeah, Marianne.
Yeah, and helping with selecting a license, what you talked about, there are a lot of services offered already within the community.
Yeah, and sometimes it's by default. If you publish in the repository, I guess Nienke, who's in the audience, she takes a look at it anyway. So you can get past in the publication process, and you get feedback on my first submissions were sent back to me, and we discussed about what's the best way to put this in the repository, and then also we decided not to put certain things in the repository because of that it's just not a convenient form of doing it. So I think it's more there's more that they can help you with than you think, but we often prefer to Google and find out on our own, because that's more the culture, I think, in many departments.
So I have a follow-up. Do we need to do something better to promote ourselves? How do we communicate to you that we exist? How do we offer our support? So what do you think you're missing that you don't see easily before you Google?
Well, I think it's a cultural thing. A lot of people have grown up as researchers with no support, at least in my case, on this, because it's so new. And now there is support, but you've already, in some cases, set in your ways. You're using GitHub because you use it in your PhD. You're using this because, and as long as it's, if it's not broken, don't fix it. It's often how people think about these things.
And just like Aurelie said, start with the students and the PhD candidates, and they're growing up with these things.
Maybe we can put some of the realization of our IT people in the spotlight on the RSM Discovery, and then they will be a good advertising for other people to contact them. Then they will get a lot of work, but
True. Thank you. That's very good. Thank you, everyone. All right. So that was full. We're 4 minutes running late, but that's no problem. Just very quickly, we still have a lot of meetings happening the week after next, because next week it's a herfstvakantie. That's my amazing Dutch for you. And so we have a few sessions next week, and the week after we have the week after, and the week after is the closing. I just want to thank everyone for joining. We have a very small gift for all the speakers. This is a Fixture cup. So Fixture is the platform that the EDR is based on. So I have one for all of the speakers. And in the audience, we set up Post-its in the bottom of your of your seat. So if you have a Post-it on the bottom, look at the front part from the front. Then you also get a Fixture cup. Yes, they have smiley faces. All right. Thank you, everyone. We have some refreshments and some Borel at the back. So I hope to see you all of them. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.